We're back. Hopefully there won't be as much rudeness this time around.
Big baby.
Sirat Rasul Allah is the earliest, most complete biography of the life of Muhammad. And boy, does it have some interesting things to say.
What do you mean? What's the big deal?
Well, imagine you're a Christian for a moment, and imagine that the earliest recorded biography of Jesus recorded him doing weird stuff, like telling his disciples to drink camel pee to help with their swollen spleens, having poets killed for writing mean poems about him, telling his followers they could pray to gods besides Yahweh, having his men tear an old woman apart by tying rope to her legs and camels and having them pull them, cutting off people's hands and feet and gouging out their eyes, having sex with a 9-year-old.
Whoa. Wait a minute. You're saying all this is in the earliest biography of Muhammad that still exists today?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying.
And it's a universal principle amongst historians that the earlier a source is, the more likely it is to be true?
Yes.
Isn't Sirat Rasul Allah earlier than the Hadiths?
That's correct. It's about 100 years earlier than either Bukhari or Muslim.
And the more embarrassing a story is, the more likely it is to be true?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying.
What do Muslims think about this book? Surely they're embarrassed.
Muslim attitudes from throughout history towards Sirat Rasul Allah are overwhelmingly positive. There's some exceptions, however, well, this is complicated, so there's no choice but to get into the weeds here. There's no one Muslim view towards Sirat Rasul Allah. There's a ton. The biggest group is probably your everyday Muslim you're friends with at work. They've probably never read or heard of this book. As Nabil Qureshi states, almost everything Muslims know about Muhammad comes to them orally, rarely from primary sources.
So most don't really know much about it then, huh?
Correct. The average everyday Muslim has not read this book, but Muslim scholars and historians from throughout history have.
Oh, and they're the ones who have a positive view, generally speaking?
Yes, especially the early ones. Guillaume gives us our translation that we have today of Sirat Rasul Allah in English. In the introduction to his book, Guillaume cites the famous Muslim scholar Sayyidul Nas to argue that Ishaq was considered absolutely legit very early on, and that those who challenged him had terrible arguments. Hadith collectors Bukhari and Muslim both cite Ishaq as an authority in their hadiths. Guillaume tells us that they did so often. Guillaume lists a bunch of early Muslim scholars who thought he was hot stuff. Some examples are the words of those like Ahmed ibn Hanbal, who calls Ishaq excellent in tradition. Abdul ibn Idris al-Adi tells us he was amazed at his learning and often cited him. Guillaume also shows a list of those who are at least partially critical of Ishaq. For example, Muhammad ibn Abdullah ibn Numair said, when Ibn Ishaq reported what he'd heard from well-known persons, his traditions were good and true, but he sometimes reported worthless sayings from unknown people. Al-Duri said Ishaq was trustworthy, but not to be used as an authority in fiqh. That's Islamic law.
Those aren't such bad comments. I say worse about you every day.
Other early Muslims were more critical, like Malik ibn Anas, who called him one of the Antichrists. Suleiman likewise called him a liar.
That's more like it.
Modern historian Shahab Ahmed says there's two different kinds of literature here. There's biographies like Sirat Rasul Allah, which he calls Sirah Maghazi literature, and Hadith literature. He argues that Sirah Maghazi writers and the Hadith writers had two different goals. The role of Sirah Maghazi was to make a biography. It's like Sirat Rasul Allah is an example of Sirah Maghazi. It was not in the first instance to establish legal, praxial, and creedal norms, but to furnish the new community with a powerful vocabulary of motifs: heroic, ethical, prosographical, geographical, rhetorical, miraculous, and so forth, with which the community could affiliate and through which it could express its values and ethos.
So like sit around a campfire, tell stories, write music, create culture, have something in common, that type of feel? That's the purpose of Sirah Maghazi literature, like Sirat Rasul Allah according to Ahmed?
Exactly. That's like the cultural building blocks of this society. This is different from the purpose of Hadith literature. Hadith literature was primarily concerned with legal, praxial, and creedal norms.
Praxial?
That's the adjectival form of the word praxis. It means like when you have a belief that's so strong that you can't help but have it affect how you act, especially in regards to like ritual actions.
Like in high school, when you believed the popular kids invited you to the Halloween party, and you showed up in what you believed was the location of the party, in a kilt, and the most popular kid's mom saw you and found out that they were throwing a party elsewhere without her permission, and she called the cops, and all the popular kids were busted, and then they never invited you to another party again, something like that?
According to Ahmed, Ibn Ishaq wasn't playing like he was a hadith writer. His job was to record words, deeds, and actions of the Prophet that are not directed at establishing legal, praxial, and creedal norms. Between Guillaume and Ahmed, then, we can see that there's a lot of views. 3 main groups. 1, people who straight up thought Sirat Rasul Allah was legit. 2, people who found it as true for the story of Muhammad and good for building a cultural identity, but they didn't see it as legally binding like hadith literature. This is what Ahmed says is the consensus. 3, the third group just thinks it's a bunch of crap.
So obviously, if the book is full of violence, nonsense, and stuff that's embarrassing, this is a problem for groups 1 and 2. Those 2 groups take it seriously in one way or another. But it seems like if you just say, it's all nonsense, you're off the hook.
Precisely. This is why a lot of Muslim apologists online are in group 3. You can read on websites where a lot of people still respect his work, however. If you look here at Ummah.com, Ibn Ishaq is considered the greatest source of seerah. But AnsweringChristians.com denies the historicity of 70% of it. Islam Compass shows only scholars who are critical of Ishaq and then concludes that only the Quran and Hadith can be trusted. So both these last 2 articles completely ignore every single Muslim historian from history who has something positive to say about Ishaq. They don't even mention them. They don't try to respond to them. It's just like they pretend like they're not even there.
That's like you whenever you get a bill in the mail and ignore it. Like the electric bill. Wait, you paid the electric bill, right?